In the ever-expansive realm of video gaming, few entities evoke the same enthusiasm and debate as Electronic Arts. For some, it's the very embodiment of the industry's greed and corporate excess. For others, it's a behemoth consistently delivering the most sought-after gaming experiences. But what about Electronic Arts has ignited such a polarizing flame of hatred and adoration within the gaming community? Today, we aim to delve into the prominent factors contributing to the prevalent animosity toward Electronic Arts. We must clarify that we don't harbor any personal biases against them. Instead, we acknowledge that they have garnered substantial disapproval from a considerable portion of the gaming community, and we intend to explore the reasons behind the sentiment. But before we dig, smash the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trip Hawkins established Electronic Arts during what many would consider the formative years of home video gaming. Even before the inception of EA, Trip Hawkins boasted an impressive and noteworthy career history. He graduated from Harvard, earned an MBA from Stanford, and subsequently became one of Apple's initial 50 employees during the late 1970s. After spending 4 years at Apple, he departed the company with the vision of establishing his venture from the comfort of his home. His goal was to create and market video games for home computers. Initially, the business's original name was Amazing Software with an apostrophe, but it swiftly transformed, leading to the birth of Electronic Arts. The impetus behind this change stemmed from his firm belief that each video game constituted a distinct work of art. In his view, the developers were the true artists, and the company's name should mirror this creative essence. Within the year, he secured a substantial investment of $5 million from private investors, enabling him to expand his business. With this influx of capital, he embarked on an ambitious journey which included hiring approximately a dozen new employees, moving operations out of his home, and successfully launching some of their initial video game titles. In the early stages, the game ideas were notably sourced from independent creators external to the company, and their names were prominently displayed on the game covers. These covers resemble music album covers, adding a unique and artistic touch to the game releases. During this period, one standout game was Dr. J and Larry Bird Go One-on-One, a title with a lengthy name that reflected the essence of the game itself. While the game may appear straightforward, it marked an important milestone in the evolution of sports video games, laying the early foundations for what would eventually become EA Sports. Moreover, it set a precedent by incorporating sports personalities into their games production and marketing. This pioneering approach would become most renowned in the John Madden series, which commenced 5 years later and solidified the concept of featuring prominent sports figures as an integral component of video game development and promotion. They started delivering their video games directly to stores, and by the conclusion of the 1980s, Electronic Arts had become the top creator of software featuring computer games. During this era, gaming consoles were becoming the more attractive market. There were significantly more households with televisions than computers, and the NES, which was the most popular system available, was capitalizing on this fact. Their challenge during that time was that Nintendo restricted EA, permitting them to create games exclusively for the NES or Nintendo Entertainment System, on the condition that these games would not be made accessible on any other gaming platform. During that time, EA decided to take a significant gamble by declining Nintendo's terms and instead redirected their attention towards the recently introduced Sega Genesis console. In 1989, EA successfully raised $84 million through an initial public stock offering, allocating a substantial portion of these funds towards developing games for the Sega Genesis platform. Throughout the early 1990s, the partnership between Sega and EA proved mutually beneficial, propelling both companies forward and visibly contributing to the growth of their respective sales. In 1992, their console game sales exceeded their PC game sales, and in the subsequent year, more than half of the $300 million in revenue was generated exclusively from Sega games. This marks the point at which their difficulties escalated, leading us to the initial factor contributing to the hatred aimed at smaller developers. Surprisingly, Electronic Arts, or EA, has a long-standing history of acquiring smaller, often independent video game development companies, ultimately causing their demise. This trend can be traced back to 1992 when EA's Sega games gained significant momentum. EA saw this as a prime opportunity to expand their business. They had aspirations for international growth and were keen on ramping up their game production. In 1992, their second major acquisition occurred when they purchased Origin Systems. Origin Systems, a video game developer with roots dating back to the 1980s, was primarily renowned for their Ultima series. This series was regarded as a pioneering early RPG or role-play game for computer platforms. When EA acquired Origin Systems, they assumed responsibility for the ongoing development of the renowned Ultima series. 2 years later, during the development of Ultima 8, there was a prevailing consensus that the game's production was hurried due to Electronic Arts imposing an impractical release schedule. Consequently, the outcome was a game that left players with incompleteness and numerous narrative gaps. Parallel scenario unfolded with Ultima 9, leading to a decline in its reputation and a subsequent drop in sales. Due to the diminishing sales figures, Electronic Arts discontinued the series, ultimately culminating in the closure of Origin Systems in 2004. While it's important to acknowledge that the situation is not entirely straightforward, from the public's perspective, it appears that EA assumed control of a previously reputable developer, compelling them to release subpar games and subsequently shutting them down. A prominent example is Westwood Studios, another game developer with roots dating back to the 1980s, renowned primarily for their Command and Conquer series. Westwood Studios was acquired by EA as a part of a broader deal worth $122 million in 1998. However, 5 years later, they closed doors as EA streamlined their studio operation. There were several instances of this phenomenon, and the pattern is evident. Are you familiar with the book Of Mice and Men? Lenny had a deep affection for those rabbits, but he inadvertently caused their demise by embracing and caressing them too vigorously. We believe that's what's happening in this situation. EA wanted these developers to excel, encouraging them to adapt their methods to EA's established system. This involved setting ambitious deadlines and implementing a more rigid and professional corporate culture. However, their efforts to improve the situation ultimately had unintended negative consequences. They caused considerable distress and stifled creative expression, a stark departure from their initial vision. Despite bearing the name Electronic Arts, their actions undermine the essence of artistry within their industry. Let's proceed to the second reason relevant to today's discussion. The second major concern centers on microtransactions and loot boxes. This practice entails spending real money to access in-game content, and Electronic Arts has gathered notoriety for its widespread implementation of these elements. While it's undeniable that these mechanisms provide EA with consistent revenue stream long after the initial game sale, they often receive a less than favorable reception from players. Since the loot box mechanism in the video game was intended to provide the player with significant gameplay benefits, it generated unheard of anger from players in 2017 before it was formally published. They were having it pay to win, which nobody wants since it costs $60 to buy the game ahead. You would be financially disadvantaged compared to the other participants if you refuse to pay extra. Furthermore, significant characters like Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader had to be purchased in loot boxes or obtained after playing the game for approximately 40 hours. Everything had a dodgy vibe to it. EA appeared to be more interested in getting money from the players than providing a good time. They even stated that this was meant to give players a feeling of satisfaction and achievement for unlocking heroes, yet that did not go over with many players either. Star Wars is owned by Disney, which is why they objected to it. The gamers were encouraged to gamble by the need for those loot boxes to play the game effectively, and the entire response began to develop into a lousy press for Star Wars. That moment may have been the tipping point that forced EA to address some of the game's faults. Our ultimate rationale for harboring this aversion is admittedly less significant than the preceding two factors, but we believe it warrants acknowledgement. Exploitation of employees. In this context, our primary reference pertains to the class action lawsuits resolved in 2006, explicitly addressing overtime compensation issues. This happened when someone posted about his husband working for 13 hours daily on a social media platform. The post garnered significant attention and subsequently triggered two distinct class action lawsuits. The artists initiated one while the programmers filed the other. Both cases were ultimately settled in 2006, with settlements amounting to approximately $15 million. Overall, EA has contributed significantly to the gaming industry. Its actions and decisions have often raised questions about its commitment to artistry, player satisfaction, and employee welfare. These controversies continue to shape perceptions of the company within the gaming community. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you can stay updated with more insightful content.